Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, August 26th around here, and we have a great show for you today. I heard a lot of talk last week about how Week 0 is pointless, how Week 0 doesn't have any juice. Well, it had a lot of juice, and we'll get into it in the first segment. We'll talk about Georgia Tech knocking off Florida State in Ireland, a crazy game that was all over the place, and definitely is something that we need to break down. And then we'll get into Florida State. We'll break down where do they go from here. Obviously, not a loss that they were planning on taking this year, and we'll see where they can kind of right the ship a little bit and get back into that playoff conversation, which is where they want to be. Then we'll break down the rest of Week 0. Obviously, Georgia Tech and Florida State was the main event, but there are plenty of others that I want to get to throughout this. SMU played a really great game. Montana State, New Mexico went down to the wire, so want to definitely break down all of that for you guys. We'll get into players of the week for this week, highlight some players that really showed out for their teams, and then we'll turn the page to Week 0. We'll ask some questions about Week 1, or we'll turn the page on Week 0 to Week 1, and we'll break down some of the biggest questions I have for the top matchups as we head into Week 1. So definitely a huge show. We'll break it all down throughout it, but before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature. Right at the bottom of that chat, you'll see a little $sign. If you click on that, you can put in any question, any comment you want, and you will see your name and comment on the screen. Always a great place to give your thoughts about the show, a question that you have about the show, and definitely a great way for us to be a little bit more interactive. I definitely want this to be as interactive as it possibly can be around here, so definitely want to get you all involved, and that's a great way to do it. If you don't want to use the super chat feature, you're more than welcome to go over to gsmcpodcast.net, and you are definitely welcome to use that as well. But let's jump into the first segment, because we had a crazy one over in Ireland this past weekend. Georgia Tech absolutely shocked Florida State in Ireland this past weekend, 24-21 on a game-winning field goal from Aiden Burr. And this was a very weird game. It came out flying, with Florida State scoring a very quick touchdown. But let's get into this stuff and let's break it down real quick. Just the flow of this game, because it was all over the place. For the first part of it, it was fast and furious. Florida State came out flying, and they scored a very quick touchdown. They scored almost within, I think, about two and a half minutes of the game, and they ran the ball all over Georgia Tech. It was absolutely incredible to watch them just impose their will on that first drive. Then Georgia Tech came right back and they responded. They did exactly what they needed to do after Florida State was, leaning on the run and definitely imposing their will. Georgia Tech did almost the exact same thing. Zach Pyron took it in for a touchdown to make this game 8-7, and that's when things kind of slowed down. You had a little bit of more defensive stops, and you had a couple of huge ones, including Amari Harvey with a huge third down stop to force a long field goal. Then it was Ryan Fitzgerald time, because he made two long ones. He made a 52 and a 59-yarder. This guy is absolutely incredible, one of the best kickers in the country, and got a good start to his Luke Rosa campaign. There's no doubt about that. But in between those, Georgia Tech took a 14-play, 75-yard touchdown drive that took 8 minutes off the clock. So they did plenty during that time to kind of subside all of these things happening for Florida State. And then coming out of halftime, there was a little bit of a lull. Georgia Tech missed a 51-yard field goal there. It was tied 14-14, and then there were 3 punts, and then a lot of stuff started happening. There were some definitely incredible drives that started to unfold, including Georgia Tech setting the tone with 89-yard touchdown drive. Florida State came right back, and DJ made a couple of huge plays on that drive to tie it at 21 apiece before Georgia Tech got the ball back with about 6.5 minutes left on the clock. They didn't give back. It was 12 plays, 49 yards, and they put him in position to kick a game winner, 44 yards as time expired. So just a remarkable showing from Georgia Tech in so many different ways. They made every single play that you want them to make. They did everything that you would want them to do if you're Georgia Tech, and really, they just wanted it more than Florida State, and that's something we'll get to here, right here, because I want to get into why Georgia Tech won this game. What was the thing that made Georgia Tech, or gave Georgia Tech, the ability to stick in this game and then eventually win it. The biggest one was shortening the game. They made this game as short as possible, and that was obviously the goal, with the team on the other side being more talented, being more bigger and stronger. At least that's what we thought coming into the game. You wanted to shorten this one, and they did exactly that. There were only 14 possessions in that game from Saturday, 7 per team, and that was the fewest since November 28th, 2020. So just a remarkable showing from Georgia Tech in, we're going to run the ball, we're going to continue to run the ball, and we're going to make it so at the end of the day, we just have to make a couple of plays to win this game, and that's exactly what happened. And then the other thing, winning the line of scrimmage was the biggest takeaway of this game. I think everyone came out of this game thinking, it's incredible what Georgia Tech was able to do against, quote-unquote, the best defensive line in the country, according to Pete Thamel, and I'm sure a couple other people that gave him that source that might be a little bit biased, but I'll leave it at that for the time being. I do think this is one of those things that really jumped out. Georgia Tech absolutely dominated the line of scrimmage, at least for about 2.5 quarters. And the biggest way to kind of show that is yards before contact. Georgia Tech was about 2.5. Florida State was 0.32, so not even close to the same thing. And it's definitely something that Georgia Tech absolutely made a living off of during this game. And it was remarkable to watch. They imposed their will from start to finish and did just incredible work on that offensive line. That offensive line for Georgia Tech is one of the strengths of their team, and it really showed. But that defensive line played a lot better than I was expecting them to play. So very, very impressive. And then finally, one of the bigger things that stood out to me was just the play calling from both sides of the ball on Georgia Tech was just incredible. Tyler Santucci on the defensive side of the ball did an incredible job, having simulated blitzes, real blitzes, bringing a corner off the edge, bringing a safety down, bringing a linebacker, whatever he did. DJ had no earthly idea what was going on. He had no idea what was coming next, and he really, really struggled to figure out how he was going to digest this defense. And Tyler Santucci was a huge reason for that. It was not easy to figure out what Georgia Tech was going to do on a defensive play call from down to down, and it showed during this game. And then on the other side, Buster Faulkner went to work. It was absolutely incredible what he was able to do during this game, because Haynes King wasn't perfect by any means. Throughout that first quarter, it was pretty ugly football. And then he made the winning plays down the stretch, but a lot of it was Buster Faulkner setting up plays perfectly, setting up that run play where Jamal Haynes wasn't touched for about 3 or 4 yards down the field, or keeping him off balance by calling an RPO or calling a pass when they're really getting comfortable and starting to stack the box. It was incredible what Buster Faulkner was able to do and keep this defense off pace, and that's exactly what we talked about going into this one. That was the way that Georgia Tech was going to be able to win, and they really did that. And then moving on to why Florida State lost this one. The biggest one is DJ is DJ. I'm not going to, tear down DJ. He did not play well. I'm not going to act like he played great by any means, but at the end of the day, he was exactly who he'd been his entire career. He was 5 for 9 beyond 10 passes beyond 10 yards. He was 0 for 3 beyond 20. That's who he is. He's never been anything different, and the idea that he was going to walk into Florida State and become this totally different player always sounded a little far-fetched to me. Now, he's still plenty capable, and there's still so many things that they can do to fix this going forward and definitely find themselves in a better place at the end of the season, and we'll get to that in the second segment, but this guy was exactly who he was, who he has been for the last little bit. He missed the deep balls. He hit everything that was, within 5 yards. In fact, he had negative air yards at halftime, which was a big tweet going around. So it was one of those games that he played the football that he's played every other game throughout his career, and it was what a lot of us expected as we head into this season for Florida State. So overall, there was a lot of things that DJ could have done better. There was a lot of things that he absolutely needed to do better for them to win this game. But also, he was DJ. He was exactly who he has been his whole career. So I'm having a hard time sitting here and putting all of the blame on him, because if you're Mike Norvell and if you're Alex Atkins and if you're all those guys, you know this, or at least you should know this, that this is the player that you have in front of you. And then defensive play calling, I thought was a little bit all over the place. Georgia Tech was able to dominate the line of scrimmage and do all of those things so efficiently because Florida State didn't really have a counter. It wasn't like they started stacking the box because they knew a run was coming. It wasn't like they were playing really good press coverage because they were getting the ball out on the, or Georgia Tech was getting the ball out on the edge to Malik Rutherford and Eric Singleton and all of those special players on the outside. Florida State had no answer. It was like they were sticking to a plan where it was just like, we're bigger, we're stronger, we're more physical, and we're going to make the plays when they need to be made. They didn't, and they had to send reinforcement at some point, and Adam Fuller just didn't for whatever reason. So whether it was the coverage scheme, where they were playing a lot of off coverage on these receivers that if you get the ball in their hands, they're pretty special with the ball in their hands, so that's the last thing you want to do, or not stacking the box nearly enough against a team that was going to run the ball. They showed you that time and time again, and they did not adapt to that one bit. But the biggest reason that Florida State lost this game, without a question to me, is the motivation or the intent of this game. Because from the not even from the second this game started, from right after that first drive ended for Florida State, there was one team that wanted it more, and it was without question, it was Georgia Tech. And I don't know what was happening going into this game for Florida State. I don't know if it was, they're Georgia Tech, we're just going to roll over them and get a win. I don't know if it was they're be harping incredibly on last year, which I don't think was going to work at all. I don't know what the messaging was, but it didn't work, plain and simple. Mike Norvell, Adam Fuller, Alex Atkins, they all missed on the motivation, on the intent of this team going into this game, because they just got outworked for 4 quarters. It was absolutely incredible to watch a team that has national title hopes and wants to be in the playoff come out just so flat in their first game. So I was just, more than anything, just really not impressed with this coaching staff as you get ready for a game that hypothetically you should be able to win. Either they didn't take it seriously enough, or whatever motivation tactics they used were not good enough for this team to get it done. And it was glaringly obvious if you were watching on Saturday. A couple other things here. The play of the game was without a doubt. It was 3rd and 12 on the second to last drive for Georgia Tech. So when they went down and took the lead 21-14, it was 3rd and 12, and Haynes King had Marvin Jones just wrapped around him. He totally beat the right tackle, and he had him wrapped around his hips, and he threw a dart to Malik Rutherford for 15 yards. Kept the drive going. Georgia Tech ends up scoring on that drive and puts them in a great place where they never gave up the lead again. Florida State came back and tied it, but Georgia Tech was pretty much in the driver's seat from that moment forward. And then a couple of the stats of the day. Florida State had one drive in the final 21 minutes of this game. That is exactly the way Georgia Tech wanted to get this one done. And Georgia Tech had 3 drives of more than 10 plays and more than 6 minutes. That's just absurd. It's absolutely executing a game plan down to the T for Georgia Tech, and for Florida State, it's the exact opposite. It's missing every single thing that you needed to do, and not necessarily putting your players in the winning positions that you needed to. So this was a crazy one. There's no two ways about that. Georgia Tech came out there, and they deserved to win that game, and they did. Now the question is, what does Florida State do from here? And we'll answer that in the next segment, because there are a number of things that they have to clean up, from the defensive line to the way DJ played to the play calling to the motivation of this team. There are a million things that need to be figured out, and we'll kind of unfold those in the next little bit. But did want to give a huge shout out to Georgia Tech and Brent Key in particular, because they're 5-0 against teams, ranked ACC teams since he's taken over. If you're a ranked ACC team going up to play Georgia Tech, just make sure you're on your P's and Q's, because they will take advantage of you. This is a very, very good team, and I'm not going to go as far to say that they're going to, be in the ACC conversation or anything, because if you look at that schedule, it's an absolute nightmare. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to be in the business of doubting Georgia Tech any longer. So we'll see what happens throughout the next little bit. But let's take our first break, and then we'll get into Florida State. We'll talk about what went wrong on Saturday and how they can kind of rebound in. They're still in the playoff race, but they got quite a few things to figure out. So we'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that crazy game over in Ireland where Georgia Tech just took it to Florida State. For whatever reason, Florida State came out very, very flat and Georgia Tech dominated them for 4 quarters and came away with a win. Although it was a 24-21 win, that was a lot of domination on Saturday. But now let's get into where Florida State goes from here. What do they do? Because the reality is you just got punched in the teeth. And the other reality is you're not dead yet. You still have the chance to make the playoff. You still have the chance to win the ACC and do everything that you wanted to do going into this year if you're a Florida State fan and a coach for that team. So everything's on the table. There's no doubt about that. The question is, how do you fix all of the problems that were shown on Saturday? Because there were quite a few of them, and they're going to have to figure them out rather quickly because there's not like there's a ton of landing area in this schedule. But let's get into this real quick, and it obviously starts with DJ. There's no two ways about that. DJ was 19 for 26, 193 yards, no touchdowns on Saturday, averaged 7.1 yards per attempt, and never completed a pass over 20 yards. That's not a great performance, plain and period. You know, maybe that's a fine performance for a team that's not named Florida State. If you're going to be a team that's competing for a national title, that is not nearly good enough, especially against a defense that was none too good a year ago. Now, they were great on Saturday, but let's be honest, there were a number of places that they should have been able to attack this Georgia Tech defense. And the biggest thing for me is this O-line just has to be better. It was the biggest glaring need that they had on this team. This O-line was just downright bad for the majority of this game, and they allowed DJ to never get comfortable, and it was supposed to be the strength of this team. It was supposed to be one of those things coming out of fall camp was, man, this O-line looks good. Man, they're going to be able to move people, and we're going to be able to run the ball really aggressively, and frankly, that's the only way they're going to be able to win games throughout the year, if they're able to run the ball effectively. So they're going to have to figure that out really quickly. But the other part of this is get the ball out on the outside really quickly. You know, get the ball out of DJ's hands, because although, you know, you don't want negative air yards for your quarterback, that's not necessarily ideal by any means. You can get it done doing that. There is a possibility to get it done. It just takes more from that coaching staff. So guys like Ja'Kai Douglas, guys like Jalen Lucas, Hakeem Williams, who didn't play in this game because of injury, are hugely important because they're so special with the ball in their hands, because they can take a, you know, screen that's 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage and take it 75 yards for a touchdown. Those guys are the ones that are going to have to really carry the weight going forward. We thought that Malik Benson was going to be the guy, and he had an okay game on Saturday, but at the end of the day, you need guys that are special with the ball in their hands, and you need guys that you can get the ball in their hands very quickly. And I think Jalen Lucas might be the main example here because he's going to be very, very special. And then the other part of it is maybe just flash that quarterback run game just a little bit more. Maybe just give defenses a little bit more to think about when they're having to guard DJ, because it's not that I think they're going to be crazy explosive when they add this aspect to their offense by any means, but I do think it gives the defense just one more look to think about, one more thing to think about when that read option is happening or when that mesh is happening. That defensive end now has to think about DJ pulling it and going around the edge. And frankly, you're not in a place where you're playing good enough offensively to take play calls off the shelf or to take play calls out of your playbook. You absolutely need to exhaust all of your options going forward. So we'll figure out if they're capable of doing that. But I want to get back to this O-line, because the running game is going to be the thing of this team. There's no doubt about that. The way this team was going to win games going into the season and the way that they're going to win games going forward is play really good defense, run the ball, and be able to win games down the stretch with a couple of big plays. That's just the reality of Florida State right now, and we've talked about it time and again. It's because when they went out in the portal this time around, they did not get Keon Coleman's, they did not get Jordan Travis's, they did not get Trey Benson's. They got DJ Hughes, they got Roydell Williams, they got Malik Benson. It's not like those are bad players, but they are a step back from what you had a year ago, plain and simple. So you're going to have to run the ball. You're going to have to be able to impose your will, and man, did they not do it on Saturday. Now, through the first drive, they had runs of 8 yards, 10 yards, 10 yards, and 28 yards. They were absolutely dominating. They averaged over 10 yards a carry on that drive. They then went on throughout the entire game to average 3.2 yards per carry and never have a rush longer than 6 yards after that. So the reality was that first drive was all well and good. Those 15 scripted plays went absolutely beautifully. from there forward, they were downright terrible, and they got dominated on the offensive line, and Roydell Williams and Jalen Lucas and all of the running backs that they have, and Lawrence Tuafili, none of them really got into a rhythm. Tuafili played the best game, and he didn't necessarily play all that great a game. So it was a very, very rough performance from this offensive line, and they got to figure it out one way or the other. I don't know if that's, rotating guys. I don't know if that's changing up the way that you play this offensive line with less pulls and just more straight up. I don't know what it looks like. At the end of the day, you got to figure out how to fix this because no offensive line this year. DJ's going to look the same way he did on Saturday next week and the week after that and the week after that, and you cannot win games when that happens. So this run game is going to be the part of this team that puts them in a position to win, and right now the offensive line is putting them in a really tough position. But on the other side of the ball, we got to talk about this defense because, frankly, from what I was seeing on Saturday, they have very little identity. Adam Fuller did not have a good idea of how he wanted to attack this offense, and a lot of that was because Buster Faulkner was so good at keeping them off balance and everything, but they have too many players for everyone to go silent. Shaheem Brown led this team with 13 tackles on Saturday. I don't remember Shaheem Brown being a big part of this game. Patrick Payton, was someone that, came in as one of the best defensive players in the country. Didn't hear his name called a lot on Saturday. That cannot happen. When you have those players that are this elite, that are all-American talent players, they cannot just not show up. And a lot of that was the play calling of Adam Fuller and not putting them in positions to win, but also it was just them not playing the football that they need to play. And it came down in a lot of ways to that interior, that defensive line. Joshua Farmer and Darrell Jackson are two very, very good players, but obviously the loss of Braden Fisk this last year was clear and obvious. There was no doubt that this defensive line was not nearly as forceful, not nearly as aggressive as they have been in the past, and that's something that plainly just has to change. Those two guys need to take big time steps forward because it's not like they have the biggest depth in the world. They have some good players behind them, but they're younger players, and you're going to have to figure out one way or the other how you're going to go about this defensive line because it was supposed to be, at least as Pete Thamel put it, the best defensive line in the country. It was not even close to that on Saturday. So they're going to have to figure it out one way or the other, whether it's rotations or just getting more out of the guys that they have. I don't know, but it's got to fix, and it's got to fix very quickly. And then you get into a couple other things from that game, and one of the biggest takeaways for me was just the coaching was bad. Mike Norvell is a very, very capable coach, and that whole staff is very, very capable and a lot of really good players. And Alex Atkins was suspended for this game, so maybe that played a part, but the reality is the play calling was iffy at points. They missed a lot of points where they could have really exposed this Georgia Tech defense. The motivation, as we talked about going into this, was an absolute nightmare from Florida State's perspective because, plain and simple, they were the team that wanted it less. They were the team that walked out on that field, and whether it was, hubris or whatever, they didn't play as hard as they could have, and they got exposed because of it. So that's something that just plainly has to change. You don't have Jordan Travis's on this team. You don't have Keon Coleman's on this team. You don't have Jared Verse's on this team. That puts more on your coaching staff. They're going to have to be able to dial up the right play call for the right time and make sure that this team is in a position to win these games, because the reality is you're not going to get bailed out by Keon Coleman on a long third down to win a game against Clemson. You're not going to get bailed out by Kalen DeLoach, knocking the ball out against Clemson that you return for a touchdown. That's not going to happen this year because you don't have those players this year. You got to figure out a way coaching-wise to bridge the gap. You got to figure out a way to out-coach the other person on the other side because you might not have the talent that you had a year ago. Now, you still had the better talent on Saturday, and you got outplayed, no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, these coaches just have to be better going forward. They have to make sure that the play calling is better, that the motivation going in is better, and that their rotations in a lot of ways are better going forward. Because if they're not, then a lot of the same thing is going to happen. They're going to get out-coached, out-efforted, and they're going to lose a lot of games that they absolutely should win. So it's going to be an uphill battle. There's no two ways about that. This team has a lot of things ahead of them, but as of right now, they got a Boston College game in about 7 days, and they got to figure out a lot of things before they get into that game because there's a quarterback named Thomas Castellanos that is going to pose problems. He's going to be able to run the ball. He ran for 1,000 yards a year ago. The dude can absolutely play football, and he's going to cause problems for this D-line that if they play the way they did on Saturday, very well could go to 0-2. So this is something that they're going to have to figure out. Now, they are still alive. They are still in the college football playoff picture. There are a lot of people acting like the sky is falling over in Tallahassee, and in some ways it is. Maybe pieces of it are falling a la Chicken Little, but at the end of the day, this is a team that can still make the playoff. There is still a path to get there, and this is not, by I hope at least, not the finished product of this Florida State team, because as we know, there are a lot of teams that play really bad football the first couple of weeks and then find their groove. Look at Alabama a year ago. If you watch them in week 3 and I were to tell you that's a playoff team, you would have called me crazy, plain and simple. So maybe that's what happened with Florida State, but they got a road that is not going to be too easy. Obviously, you take that loss early on, that does not help by any means. You got Boston College in a week, going to be a tough one that you're going to have to get through. Then you get a little bit of a bye, which is an absolute blessing. But you head into a Memphis game that is at home. You absolutely should be able to win it. That's a really good group of 5 team that is looking for that feather in their cap, and they just smelled a little bit blood in the water this weekend when they saw Florida State go down. So definitely one that they're going to have to get ready for. Then you get Cal at home, and then the gauntlet starts. You go to SMU, you got Clemson, at Duke, you got Miami, you got North Carolina, at Notre Dame, Florida at the end of the year. There are so many games that are going to be much closer in the talent level than they were on Saturday, and Florida State wasn't even able to overcome that. So there's so many things that need to change for this team, but the reality is everything's still on the table. There's not a thing for this team that they cannot do this year. I know that game was really ugly, and I know that game was left a lot to be desired for so many Florida State fans across the country, but at the end of the day, there is still a path to the playoff. You just got to really tighten the screws and get a lot of things in order very quickly, or you might just fall to 0-2, and then maybe there's not a path to the playoffs. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this team. I think a number of things that have to change, whether it's the O-line and D-line playing so much better than they did on Saturday, DJ being put in better positions to succeed, and also making those positions for himself and just playing better football going forward. The running backs have to play better. The motivation has to be better. The play calling has to be better. There's a million things that they have to fix, but at the end of the day, you still got time to fix them, and you still have a playoff that is very much in reach with an 11-1 record. So it's a lot of things to fix. It's a lot of screws to tighten, but Florida State can do it. There is an opening here where in the past, you might have been dead after this weekend. You're no longer. You absolutely have the ability to bounce back and maybe even lose one more and find your way into the playoff. But at the end of the day, they got to figure a lot of stuff out and move forward and maybe even blow out Boston College just to get the wheels rolling just a little bit. But it'll be interesting to watch how this team moves forward and if they can get over what was a disastrous performance on Saturday. But we'll definitely unfold that over the next couple of days as they get into Boston College and obviously throughout the year as they go through this. But we'll break down the rest of the Week 0 slate because it did not disappoint by any means. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just broke down what does Florida State do from here? How do they kind of rebound from what was a just terrible performance on Saturday and find their way into the playoff, which is exactly where they want to be. It's definitely still possible, but a lot of things to figure out in Tallahassee before that game in a week now against Boston College. But let's get into the rest of Week 1. There were a couple of big-time comebacks in the rest of Week 1 where I know a lot of people were tuned into Georgia Tech, Florida State, and that was about it. the rest of it did not disappoint by any means. So I want to jump into this a little bit, and we'll start with the other ACC team that played on Saturday. SMU snuck out a win over Nevada 29-24. This one was very, very close. Nevada stuck in this game for a lot longer than a lot of people thought they were going to, and I think the biggest thing here was, or I'll get to the biggest thing here in a second, but SMU outscored them 16-0 in the fourth quarter, came back from 11 down to win this one. Preston Stone and RJ Maryland just took over towards the end of this game, but one of the biggest takeaways that you have to have coming out is this two-quarterback system for SMU is just not going to work. It was, for the first half of that game, for the first three quarters of that game in a lot of different ways, it was basically they had two quarterbacks, but they had zero at the same time. And it wasn't that Kevin Jennings came in and played pretty good football during the time that he was in, but Preston Stone had no ability to get into a rhythm. He started incredibly slow. In fact, I think his first throw was a pick, but at the end of the day, he was really, really bad in the first half. And then he found his way back in the second half where they just played him all the way throughout. And I think that's going to be the thing that you have to watch throughout this the rest of the schedule is SMU has two really talented quarterbacks. The thing is, it doesn't mean that both of them can win the game for you. It doesn't mean that both of them can absolutely put on a show throughout the entire game where they're getting in and out and they're being dropped in and dropped out all the time and no one really gets into a rhythm for the game. So that's something they're definitely going to have to figure out one way or the other. On the Nevada side, Brendan Lewis was very, very impressive. He was one of those guys that when they needed a play, he made it 9 times out of 10. He made so many third down conversions with his legs, and we'll actually get into him in the next segment here. But a very, very talented player and one that gives Nevada just a little bit more than some people might have thought they had going into this year. But getting back to Preston Stone, the first half, 3 for 10, 41 yards, 0 touchdowns, and a pick. The second half, 14 for 20, 213, a touchdown, and no picks. And frankly, a lot of that came in the fourth quarter. But at the end of the day, this guy answered the bell. He did the thing that you needed him to do down the stretch of this game. And I think you move forward with him. And SMU, frankly, kept Nevada in this game for a lot longer than they should have been because they had 11 penalties, 125 yards of penalties. So SMU's got plenty of stuff to figure out. It's not just the quarterback position that is an issue in this game, but at the end of the day, it was an issue. It was something that they have to figure out, and I tend to believe that you just roll with Preston Stone going forward and you let Kevin Jennings, be the starter full-time next season. If that'll work, you'll find out. But at the end of the day, the two-quarterback system was just not working for this team by any means. So they had to figure out a way to fix it. But SMU did avoid a disaster here. Definitely could have been a really, really bad start to a season that they feel like they might be able to compete for the ACC in. So they got to figure out the quarterback position. They got to clean up a number of things, including the penalties. But schedule is plenty attackable, and they absolutely are still a dangerous team this upcoming year. But if they had lost this game, maybe they weren't. So definitely a huge win for SMU, and they keep moving forward. Moving forward to Montana State against New Mexico, we got another comeback here. Montana State was playing a very gross game of football, honestly, for the first parts of this game, and Devon Dampier really took over, and we'll talk about him actually in the next segment as well. But this was really, really impressive. Outscored New Mexico 21-0 in the fourth quarter and flipped this game on its head in a hurry. And there were a couple of big-time plays, including a remarkable 93-yard touchdown run from Adam Jones with about 4 minutes left in the game to just make this one a game. There was a lot that Montana State had to go right in that last little bit, and that 93-yard touchdown run gave them a lot of leeway. So a huge, huge play there. But one of the big-time plays that came out of this game was Devon Dampier taking a kind of naked bootleg, a very interesting play action that was just downright beautiful, 24 yards for a touchdown, and I believe he was laughing on the way into the score. So a very, very talented player, one of those guys that he's at New Mexico. I understand he's not going to get the most publicity in the world, but this is a guy worth watching. I promise you that. Throughout the season, he's going to make some really, really fun plays, and that was just one of them. So now for Montana State, really, really incredible way to sustain a punch at an FBS arena and get a win as an FCS team. So really, really impressed with this team. I knew they were a very talented team, so wasn't super worried about that. But Tommy Malote lost 2 fumbles early on in or not early on in this game. He lost one on the very first drive and then one on the very first drive of the second half. They were both taken back for touchdowns. So he put them in a little bit of a hole. Now, he did answer the bell in a ton of different ways, and the running backs answered the bell in a ton of different ways, which I'll actually get to in the next segment. But they ran for over 350 yards on the ground. Both running backs had over 100 yards. They averaged 7.7 yards per carry for Montana State. So a lot of things went right on the ground, and Tommy Malote made the requisite amount of plays to win this game. So New Mexico was up 17-0. They were up 31-14 after halftime, and they fell. And it's going to be a relatively tough season for the Lobos, if I had to imagine. Hopefully it won't be 0-12, but they had a win total of 2 going into the season, and it started off on the wrong foot. So it'll be an interesting thing to watch as we continue on with this season. Definitely a really interesting team, and a team that I think is a little bit more dangerous than some people give them credit for, but overall, a tough loss to take. But overall, the Mountain West teams, New Mexico as well as Nevada, played a little bit better football than you thought. So maybe that Mountain West conference is going to be a little bit more competitive than we once thought it was going to be. Moving on to Hawaii, they got a little bit more of a straightforward win, but Delaware State did tie this one at 14, I believe early in the fourth quarter, or early in the second half, So definitely a really interesting game, but at the end of the day, Hawaii answered right back and never looked back. They scored the final 21 points of this game, 135-14. Braden Schrager, the quarterback for Hawaii, was not as clean as you want him to be in this game. Definitely something that he's going to have to continue forward with, and overall, props to Delaware State for keeping this one close. They missed their 10.5-hour flight, had to travel over the next day, and all of the stuff that were stacked against them. It's pretty incredible that they were able to keep this one close, and a huge props to that coaching staff and that team over there. And I did want to give a little bit of love to the FCS because this is likely the last time that I'm going to be able to give love to the FCS this year. So Tarleton State got a big-time win over McNeese State 26-23. This was a really fun game, and it was dominated by Kevon Britton. He had 25 carries, 164 yards, didn't get into this touchdown, but man, did he keep this offense running for a huge part of this game. So huge shout-out to him and Tarleton State for starting their season off with a win. Southeast Missouri State got a big-time win in a little bit of a battle for FCS. They get a little trophy for this game to kick off the season, so they won this one pretty dominating fashion, 37-15 over North Alabama, and the player of the game was another running back. Peyton Brown made a number of plays in this game, including 3 touchdowns, but he had 19 carries, 97 yards, 3 touchdowns, did exactly what you need him to do if you're Southeast Missouri. And then moving on to our final one, it was the SWAC against the MEAC, the incredible HBCU battle that we get every year on week 0. Florida A&M escaped this one. Norfolk State almost came back and won this one for them, but Florida A&M was able to get out with a win, and their quarterback, Daniel Richardson, put on a show. 22 for 30 throughout this game, 286, 3 touchdowns, did exactly what they need him to do, and that's a really special player that is going to be a lot of fun to watch down there in, I believe, in the SWAC. I'm 90% sure, yes, the SWAC. But very fun player to watch, and definitely a team that is going to have plenty to say in the HBCU championship this upcoming year. So it was a crazy week 0. You know, everyone talks about how week 0 is just, I think the best analogy I heard was they give you just enough water to remind you that you're thirsty. Well, now we're on to week 1, and a lot of big-time things happening this upcoming week, but they gave us plenty of water this weekend because that Georgia Tech game was incredible. We had 2 incredible comebacks with SMU and Montana State coming back from 11 and 17 down, and there were a couple other games that gave us just enough to keep us going, but we're about to get into the thick of it. Now, we will unpack week 1 or week 0 just a little bit further on this next segment. I want to give out the players of the week. We'll likely do this pretty much every week throughout the season. This one obviously will have a little bit more around one game than it will going forward, but I want to break down and highlight the players of the week for this week right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just unpacked the rest of week 0. Obviously a lot of focus on that Florida State Georgia Tech game, but wanted to give some shout outs to the other games on the schedule because we had some good ones other than the Georgia Tech Florida State. But let's get into the players of the week. I want to do this every single week throughout the year. Obviously this one is a little bit more centric on a couple of games, but at the end of the day, there were a couple of players that made some huge plays for their teams to get wins this past weekend, and I want to start in that Florida State Georgia Tech game, and we'll start with Amari Harvey. He had 7 tackles, 5 solo tackles, and 1 tackle for loss, but this guy was everywhere. He made every single play that Georgia Tech needed to be made throughout this game, and the biggest one, in my opinion, or he made 2 huge ones, but one of the biggest ones was on Florida State was on Georgia Tech's 33-yard line. It was Florida State, I believe, 3rd and 4, and they were driving pretty well. They had a really good concept lined up, and Lawrence Tuafili got absolutely free on one side of the field, and it looked like he was going to get that first down, and then Amari Harvey came flying downhill and made a great open field tackle, knocked him down with 2 yards left, and forced them to kick a rather long field goal. Now, Ryan Fitzgerald made that field goal like he does make pretty much every field goal, it seems, but at the end of the day, that was a huge momentum shift and definitely something that kept the pressure on Florida State just a little bit. And also, on the other side of this guy and the rest of the corners on the Florida State or on the Georgia Tech team made it so much easier for Tyler Santucci to call the plays that he was calling, because you can't call that many blitzes. You can't have that many corners and safeties and linebackers coming on blitzes if you don't have really good coverage on the back end. So huge shout out to not only Amari Harvey, but all of the corners on Georgia Tech, because they were very sticky in coverage for the majority of this game, and that was the reason that Tyler Santucci in this defense was able to be so disruptive and so multiple and so different, and it made this game just incredibly difficult for DJ. So huge shout out to Amari Harvey. He might have made the 2 biggest plays of the game with that tackle on Lawrence Tuafili and another tackle on, I believe, DJ to end another drive late in the game. So incredible play from him, but he was right next to another player that made a number of plays. Kyle Efford was a guy that went a little bit viral during this game because he has that big collar that a lot of linebackers have. He looks like a very classic linebacker, and I absolutely love it as well. He's absolutely incredible and is the green dot guy for this team. So was the communicator, did an incredible job throughout that, because as we just talked about, with a lot of these exotic blitzes and a lot of these different play calls throughout the game, you got to make sure that everyone's on the same page, and that was a huge point of emphasis for this team, and Kyle Efford answered that bell. There's no 2 ways about that. So, so huge shout out to him. Remarkable player. Definitely a guy that I love watching because he plays the game with so much aggression, so much energy, and just so much love for the game. It's really fun to watch. Finished with 10 tackles, 1 solo tackle, and half a tackle for loss, but he was all over the place. He made every play, he plugged every hole, and made everything just so much easier for this defense. So being the leader of this defense, he had to make some plays, and man did he. He was really impressive throughout this game, and is going to be a huge player for Georgia Tech going forward. The guy that made the headlines, though, was Jamal Haynes. He made so many plays throughout this game, and I love this kid so much because his measurables are 5'9", 190. He does not run like he's 5'9", 190. He runs like he's about 6 foot, 210. So he's a very physical runner, even for his size, and he really showed that on Saturday. It was really remarkable. He made a number of big-time plays, including a huge third down catch where he made DJ Lundy look a little bit stupid and put him on skates, and definitely had a huge play where they had a false start on that play before where it was 3rd and 2. It went back to 3rd and 7. And then he makes that catch, goes for 16 yards, and continues that final drive. So that might have been the play of the game where you really needed someone to make a play, and Jamal Haynes made a really huge one right at that moment. So along with the work that he did on the ground, where 11 carries, 75 yards, 2 touchdowns. A very talented kid, and is going to be a huge part of this offense moving forward. I absolutely love his play, and I think when you talk about a Brent Key team that is hard-nosed, that is not going to be denied, that is going to play a little bit above their weight class, this guy embodies all of that. Incredible player and someone that I just cannot get enough of, frankly. So cannot wait to watch him the rest of the year, and I think he's going to be a huge player for this Tech team. I kind of want to combine Preston Stone and RJ Maryland. I just want to talk about the fourth quarter that they have because it was insane. We talked about how Preston Stone was 14 for 20 with 200 yards and a touchdown in the second half. A lot of that was to RJ Maryland, and RJ Maryland finished with 8 catches, 162 yards in that game-winning touchdown catch, but in the fourth quarter, in those final 2 drives, he had 4 catches, 116 yards, and a touchdown just between these 2 guys. That is absolutely remarkable, and that is those 2 guys deciding we are going to take over this game. We are not losing this game. We are not going down to Nevada in week 1. We are going to win it, and it's going to be because of us. And that's exactly what happened. It was really, really incredible to watch. In the final 2 drives of this game, they combined for gains of 49, 20, 13 on a 3rd and 7, a 13-yard pass, which was huge, and then the eventual touchdown catch of 34 yards. So it was remarkable. They absolutely finished this game, and whenever SMU needed a play down the stretch, it was Preston Stone making a pass to R.J. Maryland 9 times out of 10. So it was really, really remarkable between those 2 guys, and they were the reason that they won that game down the stretch. I can promise you that. Brendan Lewis is someone we talked about a little bit before. He had a really, really nice game. And a lot of it was on the ground, but 14 for 26, who had 209 total yards, had 2 touchdowns, 77 yards on the ground, so did plenty of work on the ground. And as we talked about earlier, he made so many plays to just keep the drive moving, to make sure that Nevada was staying in front of the sticks, had that 3rd and 7, a big-time run that he made. So a number of different plays that had to be made, and Brendan Lewis was the guy that made him 9 times out of 10. So very, very dynamic player. One of those guys that you get in a Mountain West play, you're likely not going to be the more talented team on most days. This is a great equalizer, a guy that can walk on the field and cause problems for pretty much any defense in the country, and he definitely did for SMU on Saturday. So a very impressive performance from him, definitely one that they're going to need a little bit more of as they get throughout the Mountain West schedule if they want to make some noise, but a very impressive start to his season and someone definitely to watch as we continue on. Devon Dampier is someone I want to talk about. This is a guy that I've loved since last year, frankly, but he is a little bit more on the national radar now. He finished with 18 for 26, 206 total yards, 2 total touchdowns, 1 on the ground, 1 passing, and he made a ton of big-time plays, including that just incredible bootleg that he took for a 24-yard rushing touchdown. But overall, this guy is very, very talented. He's one of those guys that you look at New Mexico's roster overall, it's not the craziest thing in the world. It's not necessarily overly incredible. That guy quarterback is incredible. It's kind of like Nevada in a lot of ways, where you have that quarterback that is going to make the plays that you need him to make. So maybe they're a little bit more interesting in the Mountain West than we once thought, because this guy is a whole lot of fun. And if they can find a couple other players around him and make some plays, it's going to be a team that maybe isn't going to compete for the Mountain West, but definitely could make some things interesting and give some teams some headaches on a certain Saturday. So going to be incredible to watch that guy, a guy that I really, really like and have liked for quite some time, but now a little bit more on the national spotlight, and love to see that, obviously. And then moving on to the duo of running backs for the Montana State. They went to work. It was incredible to watch Aaron Jones and Scooter Humphrey go to work in this game. It was incredible. They had 36 carries, 307 yards, 2 touchdowns in this game, and it split very, very evenly. Jones had 17 carries, 167 and a touchdown. Humphrey had 19 carries, 140 and a touchdown. So it went pretty evenly, and a lot of the Jones yards were on that 93-yard carry that gave Montana State a shot in this game. So incredible play from both these guys, and they were the only reason that they were in this one. Tommy Malott really put them in a tough spot in a number of different ways with those 2 fumble sixes, but at the end of the day, he was able to flip a switch, but there's no switch to flip if these guys are not holding it down in the run game. I can promise you that. So an incredible performance from these 2 guys, and they made every single play that they needed. So it could have been sullied by 2 big-time mistakes down the stretch, but Tommy Malott was able to flip the switch. Maybe he's another player to highlight here, but at the end of the day, the running backs were the ones that won the day for them. And overall, I mean, Week 0 had a ton of big-time players. It had a ton of guys that came out of nowhere and made all of the plays that they needed to make for their team. Obviously, Jamal Haynes is someone that you're going to hear plenty from this year, as well as R.J. Maryland, that is going to be an absolute monster throughout this year. But at the end of the day, there are some guys that I wanted to highlight from the FCS ranks that just deserve their due. You know, they deserve a little bit of more love, deserve a little bit juice going their way. And then the guys on the Georgia Tech defense definitely deserve some love. Amari Harvey and Kyle Efford were all over the place, including some other guys. Zeke Biggers made some plays. Romello Height was an incredible player for a number of different plays throughout that game. So it was really, really awesome to watch all of these guys play. And this is obviously something that we'll do throughout the next, couple of weeks, really throughout the season, honestly. And we'll break down all of the big-time players as I see it. But this obviously was a little bit more concentrated around those 4 games, but there are plenty more that we can highlight throughout the next little bit, and it'll be really, really fun to get into this throughout the week, and maybe it's a little bit of a sneak peek of the Heisman odds as we get throughout the year. But let's take our final break here, and when we come back, we're going to do some of the questions. We're going to turn the page finally from Week 0 to Week 1. We're going to ask some of the big-time questions out there for the top matchups in Week 1. We got some pretty big glaring questions that need to be answered before we get into before we get to that game, or some of these teams might be in a little bit of trouble. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about all of the big time players from Week 0, gave out some of the players of the week, but now it's time to turn the page. We are moving on to Week 1 here, and not that Week 0 wasn't incredible, absolutely loved it, but Week 1 is going to be that much more incredible. It's going to be awesome to watch all of these games unfold, and there are still some big time questions around these big time teams that are going to be playing on Saturday that they're going to have to figure out either on Saturday or before Saturday if they're going to be able to win those. So let's get into this. And my biggest question for Georgia at least is, do they have a running back issue in Week 1? And I don't think they're going to have a running back issue for the whole year, but there's a reality where Week 1 gets just a little bit sketchy. Roderick Robinson, a very talented guy that had gotten rave reviews throughout the offseason, has been down with a turf toe injury, and that one's a very, very hard one to figure out when he's going to be back from. There's a reality where he does not play on Saturday. Branson Robinson is just getting back from about a 9-month-long injury that he is still recovering from, and Trevor Etienne's status for Week 1 is still a little bit up in the air. With an arrest he had earlier in the offseason, there is a suspension that could be in play at Georgia. Not really sure what the story is there, but definitely something that could be on the table. And if all of those things happen, let's say Branson Robinson, or both Robinsons in general, just aren't 100%, and Etienne is sidelined for Game 1, what are the alternatives? How can they move forward? And one of the bigger ones is Cash Jones, a very talented former walk-on that has gotten work here or there. You know, he very much understands this offense, has done a number of really good things in his past, and definitely is going to be a big-time player for them. But the guy that I'm really watching is the guy on your screen right there. Nate Frazier is a freshman and a very, very interesting name to watch. A super talented guy that might just be thrust into action in Week 1 with all of the different questions around that position. But at the end of the day, this is a very talented guy, someone that they absolutely love, and has gotten some very, very intense comps like Todd Gurley and Nick Chubb during his time in Athens. But at the end of the day, a very talented kid, and maybe, just maybe, you have to ask a little bit more of him in Week 1. Now, I think they're going to be more than fine in running back going forward, and I don't necessarily know if it's going to be a problem for Week 1, but there's a reality where Roderick Robinson is still suffering from turf toe and can't get out there. There is a reality where Branson Robinson is not near 100% after coming back from that injury, and there is a reality where Trevor Etienne is suspended for that first game, and if all three of those things happen, then you're in a little bit of a precarious situation against a defensive line for Clemson that is going to be really good against the run. So that'll be very interesting to watch throughout this weekend. We'll obviously know by Saturday what this situation is, but as of right now, it looks just a little bit up in the air at the running back position for Georgia. Moving on, who is Notre Dame's starting five on the offensive line? Because that's been a really, really hard thing to figure out throughout fall camp, and it happened in a lot of ways because Charles Jagusa went down with a big-time injury. That was going to be their starter at left tackle, and it caused a lot of shuffling, a lot of confusion around that offensive line, and on Saturday, they got to play a really good defensive line. Texas A&M has Nick Scourton and Cassius Howell coming off the edge. They have Shamar Turner and Albert Regis in the middle, and they're going to be able to push you around if you do not have that offensive line set the way that you want it to. So it looks like this offensive line is the most questionable part of this team. In fact, the group over at Blue and Gold, the On3 Notre Dame page, Tyler Horka kind of went around and asked the team, what is the weakest unit of this team? And it was offensive line, without question. And it's in a lot of ways because of that injury. Frankly, I don't know if they would be number 9 on this team in position groups if it wasn't because of that injury. And Riley Leonard's a really good player. If that O-line doesn't come together, it doesn't necessarily matter how good of a player he's going to be this upcoming year. As of right now, the way it looks like it's shaking out is they're going to have freshman Anthony Knapp at left tackle. They're going to have sophomore Sam Pendleton at left guard. Ashton Craig, a junior at center. They're going to have another junior, Billy Schrouth, at right guard, and then Emil Wagner, the one guy that has been the constant throughout this, at right tackle, another junior. So that right side looks a little bit more experienced. That left side is dangerous. You have a freshman and a sophomore, both of which have not played big-time snaps, and I don't think either have gotten a start during their career. I know that the freshman obviously hasn't, but I don't think Sam Pendleton has either. So they're going to have to figure that out. If they can totally attack one side of this offensive line, if they can just put Nick Scourton on Anthony Knapp over and over and over again, it's going to be a nightmare day for him, plain and simple. So it's going to be really, really interesting to watch this, and they got to figure this out before Saturday. And if they don't, then they could be in for a long day, and it could be off to a very, very rough start in 2024 for Notre Dame. Moving forward to that game in Gainesville, who needs it more? We talked about this a little bit ago. My answer was Florida, and I think I stick by that, but man, you could really argue me into Miami because Miami's walking into this year with so much talent, so much hype, so much hope going into this year, and they got to make some noise. And if they fall on their face in week 1 and they lose in Gainesville, there's going to be a lot of people yelling from the mountaintops that this team is overrated, that they don't belong, that they're not going to be a team that's going to have to be worried about. That's the same old Miami. I promise you'll hear that plenty, but at the end of the day, it would be really bad if this team lost that week 1 game and brought all this momentum, all this hype to a screeching halt, and then you got to figure out how you go from there. Exactly like what Florida State is dealing with right now. So it'll be interesting to watch it. But on the Florida side, they face one of the hardest schedules coming forward that I've seen in quite some time. It's an absolute nightmare, and that those last 5 weeks of the season we've talked about pretty much ad nauseum. So I won't get into it, but they're a nightmare, no doubt about it. But at the end of the day, both teams are going to be ridiculed. Both teams will be questioned. Both programs will have a ton of questions to answer if they were to lose this game. At the end of the day, I think the Gators need it just a little bit more. I think when you look at that schedule, when you look at what's in front of them, and when you look at the perception around Billy Napier, they badly need this one. And I think Miami would be hurt, no doubt about it, like Florida State, but could turn it around and still win the ACC even with this loss. So it'll be an interesting one to watch. I'd lean the Gators need it just a little bit more, but this is one of those that is an absolute battle, and it's going to be very interesting to watch throughout this one. But the other question I have is, who's walking into a trap in week 1? We saw in week 0 that it was off the walls crazy, and Georgia Tech was able to pull off that big-time game. There's another one in week 1. I can almost promise you that. There's going to be something that goes crazy this upcoming weekend, and Penn State at Morgantown could be the number 1. When you look at the environment that they're going into, when you look at the team that they're going to play against, a very veteran team with a good coach that has a lot in place, kind of like that Florida State game. It could get a little bit sketchy for this team if they walk in just a little bit off kilter for Penn State. So you have a feeling that another top 10 team could be going down this upcoming week, and actually we'll get into that tomorrow. We'll break down just how chaotic it could be in week 1, but at the end of the day, this is a very tough environment, a team that is undergoing a lot of changes against an upcoming dangerous team like West Virginia. it could get interesting in Morgantown. I'll leave it at that for the time being. Everyone's circling the Colorado against North Dakota State game, and frankly, I do think Colorado is going to win. I do think Colorado is going to come away with this one, but if North Dakota State can slow this one down, if they can play a tough, hard-nosed type of game where they're going to run the ball much like Georgia Tech did against Florida State, if they can do that against Colorado, this one could get really interesting. If that Colorado offensive line is not where it needs to be as of right now, this one could get really interesting. So overall, I'm not necessarily super worried about Colorado in this spot, but at the end of the day, that is a very talented, very disciplined North Dakota State group coming in, and maybe things get a little bit interesting, and I'm sure a lot of people would love that, but at the end of the day, I do think Colorado is likely the team to pick here. Moving on, Florida State also walks into a trap, and I know that sounds crazy because the reality is they should not have any question that they are going to be able to win this game at home against Boston College, but this one's sketchy. Thomas Castellanos on the other side might even be able to pose more problems than Haynes King. He's not necessarily the passer that Haynes King is, but with his legs, he's downright special, and it's one of those things that if that defensive line is not figured out the way that it needs to be a week from today, they're going to have a nightmare on their hands, and they might have a season where it starts 0-2 on their hands. So it'll be definitely something really interesting to watch, but at the end of the day, if Florida State can't refocus, if they can't get their stuff together and make sure that they are ready for that game on Monday and win that game, and not only win it, but win it by a margin, if they don't do that, then we have a big-time problem in Tallahassee, and it's not just, this team. It's a program problem. So that's something we'll obviously unpack if that does happen. I wouldn't bet on this one either, but it's a little bit of a trap area for Florida State for sure. And then I want to talk about USC and LSU. Is this the most consequential game of week one? And this one sounds a little bit interesting because obviously it's not the biggest game. When you talk about Notre Dame, A&M, when you talk about Clemson, Georgia, those are the ones that you really point to and say those are the huge games this week. But USC and LSU is an interesting one because both these teams have the ability to make noise in their conference. They have one very glaring side of the ball that needs to be fixed. That defensive side of the ball, whichever one of them fixes it quicker, is going to have the chance to make some noise. There's no doubt about that. So there's going to be a number of different ways that they're able to possibly make noise this upcoming year, and a lot of it's going to be able to be shown in week one. And another part of this is another 1-to-1 comparison between the SEC and the Big Ten. We'll get another one in week 2 against Texas and Michigan, but at the end of the day, this is a game that's going to be brought up in college football playoff conversations, not only because it's a 1-to-1 comparison, but because LSU plays Alabama, they play Ole Miss, they play a ton of other teams that are going to have their say at the playoff, as well as them maybe having a say. USC plays Michigan, they play Penn State, they play a number of teams that are going to have their say in the playoff. So this might be one of those games that maybe neither of these teams are in the conversation for the playoff, but you got to use this game to then, draw conclusions for other matchups and for other battles between two teams from the Big Ten and the SEC. So it's going to be really interesting. This one is obviously one that we expect to see a ton of points in, and I'm right there with pretty much everyone else. It sounds like Garrett Nussmeier is suffering from a couple of turnover troubles throughout camp, so definitely something to watch there. But overall, I think we're going to hear about this one a lot throughout the season. I think we're going to hear about this one when it's talked about in conference situations and CFP situations and just how good these teams are. I think they're going to point to this one and say, that's where everything started to happen for LSU, or that's where everything started to happen for USC. So it's going to be a huge game in week 1 and 6 days here. So it'll be really interesting to watch that one unfold. Definitely one that has a lot on the table for both of those teams. But overall, we had a great week 0. We had a week 0 that going in, you only had 4 games that really caught your eye. You only had one game that really, really caught your eye. But at the end of the day, they all delivered. Georgia Tech gave us an incredible win in Ireland that really got this season off on a chaotic foot that I think it's going to stay on for quite some time. And then you got a couple of big-time comebacks from Montana State. You got a big-time comeback from SMU to save themselves. It was a really, really fun weekend, and that was just a taste. That was just a little bit of water. Now we get the entire landslide. That was just, a little pebble rolling down the hill. Now we get going for real, and week 1 starts in full effect. So we'll get into that tomorrow. Some little tidbits that we obviously need to get to, like Michigan tomorrow. But at the end of the day, we're turning the page from week 0 to week 1, and now it's full engines go. Let's get to work and let's get this season in. It's going to be incredible. I can promise you that. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.